kind of got my mind rolling a little bit, like, yeah, this is good, God, thank you for this, this confirmation of the trip, at least. And as we, I finished up my trip there, and I was coming home on a red-eye flight from San Diego, and it was terrible, terrible flights just to Atlanta, and then I was on my Atlanta flight up to Cincinnati from like 7 in the morning till 9 or whatever, and I hadn't been to sleep yet. And I finally dozed off about 30 minutes into that flight. And while I was asleep, I had a dream. And I had a dream about a lion. And the lion, it wasn't like a scary dream. It wasn't something, I don't think, that was bad. It was just a dream of, we were in Africa, we were in like a safari truck, or whatever. And this lion jumped up on the hood of the truck. And in my dream, I just felt like I was supposed to, you would do if you felt somewhat safe, you'd be like, trying to scare the thing away or something. And that's what I did in my dream. I'm just like, and it jumped off the hood of the truck. And I woke up right after that, and I remembered the dream, but I didn't think about it at all. It was just one of those dreams. I thought, well, I'm going to Africa, and that's just a dream you would have if you were doing that. So I get home just about an hour later, and I'd been up all night because it was a red eye, but I'm just not very good at sleeping during the day. And Kim was home, and she came and got me from the airport, and we decided to go to the pool and just go lay out by the pool. Maybe I'd fall asleep, laying out or something like that. And we were walking down to the pool at our condo. And these two kids, they stop us and they said, do you know anybody that's missing a cat? And we're like, no. And they're like, well, there's this one down here in this pit. I'm like, what? So we go over and look, and there's, in the condos over there, some of the condos have underground, almost lower levels, and they have what's called an egress window. It's like a really big window in case there's a fire that they can get out. But this window well, I'm not exaggerating, it was 6 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot deep. I mean, it was a huge window well, and it's concrete wall with built-in ladders to get out. And we looked down in there, and there's this cat down in there. And it had fallen down in there apparently and got hurt and was stuck and couldn't get out. So to make a really long story a little bit shorter, we went to the pool, we gave it some water, went to the pool, and Kim, of course, being the humanitarian she is, she's like, we gotta go back to that cat. I'm like, okay, what do we got? We're ill-equipped, I would say, to say the least. I got swim trunks on and a beach towel, and there's this angry beast down in this pit that's ready to kill me. So I go down in this pit, and I'm easing up to this thing. Here I am, a grown man afraid of a cat, right? And I take the towel and I kind of scoop it up, and it's actually not doing anything yet, but right about the time I get to here, this cat goes nuts and starts trying to rip my eyeballs out, So I'm like, yeah, forget this. I said, we're getting out of here. And I just dropped the cat, and we got out of the pit, and we called the SPCA, and they came and got it, and hopefully found the owner or whatever. So, of course, that's not a lion, but it's a feline, right? So, and I'm 40, I'll be 41 here in a couple weeks, and yet in my life have I ever went down into a pit with a feline, right? I mean, that's just not something that would ever happen. So I hadn't put anything together yet, and God, like I said, God has to beat me over the head, and He usually does it in threes. Well, less than 24 hours later, this is where it gets interesting. I coach my son's baseball team, as many of you know, and we had a picnic after the game in the morning, that next morning. And the church is not officially sponsored by any church, but the main coach goes to Church on Fire, and he really supports the team. And there's one supporter that likes to stay anonymous, and he gives a lot of money to this baseball team. And I mean, we pray before practice. It's a great team, to be on, praise God. But during the picnics, this guy comes up to me. I didn't know him. I've never seen him before in my life. And he goes, Matt. I'm like, yeah. He goes, you don't know me, but I'm the sponsor for this team. And we'd been at the picnic for about an hour. And he said, I just felt really called to come over here and talk to you. And I'm not sure why, but let's just talk. So we just started talking, and it went pretty quick to God, the conversation did. He's a strong Christian. And we talked for maybe 30 minutes. We talked for a long time. It was a great conversation. And he goes, you know what? I don't know why, but I'm supposed to tell you about this book I'm reading. I'm like, okay, what is it? It's called In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day. And I'm like, what? I mean, that's a bizarre book title, right? And it's like, I'm telling you, God has to stomp me to get me to recognize what He's talking about. So, and I still hadn't put it together, by the way, until I went home and I downloaded it on my iPad and I started reading this book. And I got the first chapter in, and I'm like, oh, thank you, God. And it really just all of a sudden from there, and we were leaving for Africa a week and a half later or whatever it was, and He he just started pouring. So this message isn't about the book, but it is a good book, by the way. It's by Mark Batterson is his name, if you ever want to check it out. But it was how God led me to this book, and that's how he will work in our lives to get us to the point where he wants us. And I think that's what's really cool. So that's how I know if it's God or not. That's a long way for me to make that point. But if God may work in your life different as far as when you hear him, is it him? But once we know it's him, and in this situation, by this time, I finally got it. I knew it was him that was telling me, it's this whole chasing lions thing and what it really means. So at that point, I decided to obey. We each have a choice. Once we know it's God, we have a choice of whether we are going to obey what he had asked us to do or not. And this is where I'm going to do my best not to get emotional, because you know what? We don't know. And even Chris and I talked about this on Friday. You do not know what might have been. God's not going to tell you, well, you should have done that. If you would have, this would have happened. But I don't know about you, but I ask for forgiveness all the time, right? I mess up here, I mess up there, and I admit that I messed up, and I ask God to forgive me. I don't want to have to ask God for forgiveness for omission. I don't want to feel like, yeah, God, I know you told me to do that, but I just didn't want to do it. Because we do not know what God would do with anything that he would have us to do. So we have two choices. Do we obey or do we not obey? Once we know it's you, Lord, are we going to do what you would have us to do? And it doesn't have to be a lion. That's the thing. It could be something very small. Andrea's story of going to Africa is so touching to me. Because in her heart and her soul and her spirit, she's known for years and years and years that she was supposed to go to Africa. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, she didn't know any of those things. So when this trip came up and she heard about it, she obeyed. Now it sounds like I said, some people it'd be a big trip. For her, she knew she was supposed to go. So for her to say, yes, Lord, I'll go, was the easy part. But she obeyed God. And for her, even though it was a small thing to say yes, the work that God did in her, through her, and through the whole team, because she said yes, was immense. It was just wonderful. It changed her life. The trip changed my life. It changed Kim's life. So just obeying even the little things, God will work with you to get those things done. So once we say yes, there's a very popular passage that most people know, Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And listen to this. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified. So when God calls us and we do answer, what do we get at it? Right? Yes, I was a good boy, Lord. I didn't. Please don't be mad at me. I said yes. But what's really cool is that once we say yes, God will do three things. He'll do a lot more than that, but there's three things I want to tell you about. One, he will equip you. We talked about not being equipped before, that Benaiah wasn't equipped that day. I didn't feel equipped to get up here and do this. Moses didn't feel equipped to speak. But when the time comes, if you obey, God will equip you with whatever you need to get it done. Some of you know my story when I went down to Texas when my dad went through the hurricane in 2008. That was really my first time that I really feel like, God, I know this is what you want me to do. I'm going to go do it. And God blessed that trip so well. As soon as I found out, I said yes, and I was going. This church helped out a ton. People at work that I didn't even know would have any interest helped out a ton. And I ended up having so much stuff, I had to steal Chuck's van to go down there and take it down there. And God worked through that, and it blessed Chuck. And so when I just said yes to something like that, I know Chuck's family was blessed through the whole thing because of their van and the whole story behind my dad still drives that van, and it's, he will give you what you need. And he gave me everything I needed. I didn't even know where I was going. I knew how to get there, but the island was shut down. I didn't think I would even be able to get on the island. And I drove down there, and you would have thought it was just laid in gold, the path down there, and I got up to the island. I told the guy who I was. He was like, oh, Miles' son? I've heard nothing but good things about you. Come on board. People weren't allowed on the island because it was still a disaster area or whatever. I didn't have any issues whatsoever. So he will equip you to get done what he wants you to do. You know, if you're standing in line at Chipotle and you just feel that you have to do this every time, you just feel like there's a couple in front of you, you can tell that they're trying to decide what they're going to get to eat because they only have so much money to spend, you know, or whatever it may be. And God may tell you, you know what, just buy their lunch today. Saying yes to something small like that, you just don't know what that can do for that person and what it will do for you. So God will he'll equip you with what you need to get it done. What he also does is he prepares the way for you as you go. Once we said yes to going to Uganda, you know, and I didn't know how it was going to go when we first went over there, and I thought, are they going to be ready for us when we get there? Or are we going to get there and they're going to be like, okay, what are we doing? You know, kind of thing. God, through us saying yes that we would go, he poured himself and his spirit into that area that we were going. And they had prayer meetings. They had so many things that were going on there. And Chris mentioned that I spoke at this church in Uganda. It's a Pentecostal, Geraldine, it is Pentecostal, son, I'm telling you. The guy opened up the prayer and spoke for 15 minutes in tongues. But he would pray in English and he would pray in tongues. And the very first words out of his mouth was the exact same thing that Kim and I were going to talk about. Halfway around the globe, God prepared that church for us to come there. And as I got to speed up here, I'm sorry. So, the other things that God will put into place as you're going and you're obeying in the things that you're doing. I mean, if you came Wednesday, you know how he just blessed our flight there and stuff. It was so wonderful, just not having to worry about any of that stuff. Our luggage got where it had to go. Our gates were changed so that we were close to the next flight. I mean, it was just anything that went right, could go right, went right. Well, some things happened, though, while we were there that the personnel that we were supposed to work with changed. It swapped around, and the church we were supposed to swapped around. And at the time, you're thinking, man, it's kind of chaotic, and it seems like it's not well planned. But what you find out is God has a totally different plan in mind. And the driver that drove us from down south in Uganda and Kampala up to Arua, he wasn't supposed to be with us at all that day. Actually, nobody that went with us was supposed to be with us. Only the guy that we met up there. But our driver in particular, he drove us up there, and you kind of get to know somebody when you drive 8 hours across Africa, you know. Yeah. Just a really cool guy. I don't know how old he is, Kim. You know, late 20s. Just a very cool guy. And we heard a horrible story for him on the way up there. That along that very road, we passed the spot, and they started speaking in whatever language they were speaking in the truck. And I kind of was like, well, what's that about? And it was a place where him and his sister, he was with somebody in the car, and they got taken over at gunpoint, stripped naked, and took their car. At that very point, we had driven over the road, and he feared for his life tremendously that night. And so you kind of get to know somebody, and you kind of feel close to somebody when you travel all that way. Well, he was supposed to go up there with us that night, and he was supposed to take the bus back that night and go back to Kampala, and he was going to leave the vehicle for the others and us to use while we were there. Well, I didn't know this, but something happened, and he didn't go back that night. And at the church Kim and I spoke at, I was literally getting up to speak, and I look out in the audience, and he's sitting there. Now, he was not supposed to be there. And there was, how many, 18 different churches that we were spread across that morning, not our group, obviously, but the group we were with. So he could have went to any of those 18 churches. So he ends up at mine. And this story that I just told about lion chasing and those things hit home so hard to that guy. God will put so many things into motion when we obey to make everything right. Now, does everything go right? No. We all know there's troubles, and Satan will insert himself where he can. But we know God's the supreme one who can make everything happen that he wants to happen. He wanted this guy, Henry, to hear this message on that day, and it would have taken a logistics person in the United States 4 years of planning and 5,000, project manager man hours to get all these people and these things and these situations in place. And God just goes, you know what? Henry, go listen to that message. And it all happens, right? So God will prepare the way for us. The other thing that God will do, so I told you he provides a way and he prepares a way. He actually goes with us. There's no way that I, of my own ability, would be able to get up in front of a group of 100 Africans and really make them understand what God would have them